Hey guys, I hope you guys are having a good week. I am recording this a week after the Oscars, the last Oscar season that happened. So I think it's a perfect time to kind of predict what's going to happen next year in terms of Best Picture nominees. So I've been kind of like wrestling around with the idea of trying to predict the top 10 Best Picture nominees for next year. It's strange to really, put that out there so early in the game, but you know what? I want to be ahead of the curve. And I really want to like kind of think through some of the picks that I chose on this list that I have that I will show pretty soon. Now, here's the thing. I want to do something a little bit different. Usually you would kind of like list your top 10 and then you kind of like put a line into, those top 10 and then below the other, top 10 you put as the least likely films that are going to be nominated for Best Picture for next year. But also, you also have to take into account that Cannes Film Festival hasn't started yet. And usually after the Cannes Film Festival ends, you usually get like a good grasp of some of the films that will be contending for this year's Oscar race. And last year we had Honora, which won the Palme d'Or, and then you also have Emilia Perez, which won the jury prize at Cannes. And you also had The Seed of a Sacred Fig, which was also part of our International 5 last year. And there was also The Girl with the Needle, which was also part of our International 5 last year. So you have to put like all that like formula into your head just for a little bit. Also on top of that, you also have to wait till, the fall film festivals start. That's usually when you get like a better grasp of some of the contenders that are going to, appear or maybe more blank in the season. So the reason why I'm doing this is for, fun. I kind of want to like be ahead of the curve and really, try to figure out mathematically, stat-wise, and also, pragmatically my predictions for the next year's Oscars. And also, I want to do something really fucking crazy. I want to use ChatGPT or DeepSeek to kind of help me out a little bit on some of the picks that I listed on a prompt. So I kind of like played around with some of the scenarios that could take into account upon this year's award season next year. So let's kind of like get into that. I'm going to list out my top 10 and then some of the other ones that are like least likely to get nominated. And then we'll just go from there. And, as I kind of like talk about some of the films that I've picked, I will also kind of like play around with the AI language models and see what they think or what the robot thinks, the evil robot from the cloud thinks about these picks. But yeah, let's like get into it. Now, I listed my top 10 most likely picks for next year's award season in terms of Best Picture nominees. I did it in sequential order. On the language model that I used, DeepSeek, I listed it as 1 through 10, but I think it doesn't know that I did it in sequential order from like most likely to, least likely. But I think also at the same time, I kind of like, confused the language model. So I'm going to list out my, top 10 from here. And then I'm going to, also read out the prompt and see what exactly DeepSeek or ChatGPT is saying about some of the picks that I chose. So starting from number 1, I know it's going to be really, really crazy to, put this up front, but I think it's definitely time for this director to, finally have his time in the sun. And that is One Battle After Another by Paul Thomas Anderson. Now listen here. I understand that, Paul Thomas Anderson is trying to get into the big budget blockbuster territory with this new film. The only, negative that I can personally, take into account is the source material. It is a Thomas Pynchon novel that he's adapting, Vineland, which I actually read last year in terms of, trying to figure out if it's going to be worthy enough for, the Best Picture nominee. And even though I think the film and, the actual plot of Vineland is pretty fucking crazy and out there, I think the way Paul Thomas Anderson is going to like take this movie into, the narrative section of, the film, I think he's going to do pretty well. I think there's going to be, kind of a way for him to kind of play his own sensibilities while also, trying to play with the general audiences. Now, another negative thing that I can, pick up is the test screenings that happened a few times. There was another one that happened just this week in Vegas, and it got mixed reviews. And usually I don't like to, take word of mouth from like test screenings, because it can go either way. It can go, oh, this movie sucks and it's not good, but we can probably like fix it in post, and, where it gets fixed at the end of the day, it is fixed. Or it could go, completely literal, and it could be a disaster. But I think the test screenings are giving me a little like a red flag. I do also think that Paul Thomas Anderson did a Punch-In adaptation a long time ago, and that was Inherent Vice, and that was a divisive movie from a lot of people who saw it, me too, back then. But now I saw it again. I love that movie. It's fucking fantastic. But I think, adapting Pynchon, his, style of dialogue and his way of making, a plot is going to be kind of, a weird type of territory to pull. But I think with the reports of it being a big budget film, and it's like action sequences after action sequences, and you have Leonardo DiCaprio as the lead, like, I think it's going to be just as fine. I did, put this in sequential order, but I think this is like the most likely to, at least have some sort of awards contention. But let's just move on to like the rest of the list that I have here. I have Whitney Springs from Trey Parker and Matt Stone. This is the Kendrick Lamar comedy movie that apparently is coming out in July. Allegedly, it's supposed to come out on, Paramount Plus, but Paramount is denying that. They haven't said anything about that, but I'm predicting it's probably going to be in theaters. And if it is in theaters, then it's worthy of being here, because I think at least one comedic film should appear on this list in terms of like the Best Picture nominees, and one that should be, a satire on something. And it's a satire on slavery, as the main character is, I think, descendant of a couple slaves in their family. And it turns out that one of their, friends is a person who owned this family before that, and it's a weird thing. I don't know how it's gonna work out, but it's Matt Stone and Trey Parker, and their South Park comedic stuff is just, it's fucking crazy, and they need something. They need like a W. So that's why I have it at number 2. And also at the same time, I think Kendrick Lamar is having a really good, generational run with his music, and it would be really cool for him to be on that like Oscar stage upon next year. And then number 3, I have Hamlet by Chloe Zhao. This is an adaptation of a Shakespeare story, not entirely, but it is taking place of Shakespeare's personal life. The wife had some problems, and it's also kind of like fictional, so it's playing around with history and making it also a part of like fiction. But positives, I think Chloe Zhao will return to the Oscar stage ever since, Nomadland won Best Picture and Chloe Zhao won Best Director. I know she did Eternals a couple years ago, and, that didn't work out in terms of Oscar chances. But honestly, I think Chloe Zhao, when you kind of like put her in her comfort zone, in her, artistic middle ground, she can deliver like some good shit. Now, I think the negative thing is usually a lot of like returning Oscar winners, sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. It really depends on like how Chloe Zhao comes back with this film. Is she, doing something different with her filmmaking skills? Or is she, completely doing like the same thing with, emulating Terrence Malick? I don't know. I'm not completely sure, but I think Hamlet also has Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescal in the casting, if I remember correctly. So, those people are going to like come back for, the Oscar season, as they should. But that's why I have Hamlet at number 3, or Hamnet at number 3. Number 4, I have High and Low, or Lowest to Highest, or Highest to Lowest by Spike Lee. Spike Lee is overdue for a Best Director nomination and win again. He was robbed for BlacKkKlansman.
Let me give you a British answer. It was my cup of tea.
But this is an adaptation and a remake of the classic Kurosawa movie, High and Low. Positively, it's Apple TV. They're fully committed to, releasing it in theaters, along with, the Apple TV release. I think the red flag is Spike Lee doing a remake. That did not go well with, Old Boy. But I think, bringing Denzel into the mix will definitely help Spike Lee in the long run. But that's like my positive and like my negatives with High and Low. But I would definitely look for, this movie. Then number 5, I would probably personally put it at number 1, but I think since this director and just the subject matter has been kind of tired a little bit, it might backlash a little bit. But at the same time, I gotta put it there because this is my boy, Luca Guadagnino. After The Hunt, he is coming hot off of Challengers and Queer, and now he's doing another film this year, this time around with Julia Roberts and Ayo Adibri, and it is a Me Too plot dealing with a university student and a teacher and accusations that are, going around the university. I don't know too much about the film or the main plot. I heard the script is actually really good. It's been on the blacklist for a little bit, and it's been passed around by several, directors and people, and Luca got it, and now he's directing this movie. And apparently it's completely different from any other Luca movie, according to himself. It's not dealing with desire. It's more dealing with something else that's not sexual. So I'm excited. The reason why I have it at number 5 is because Luca has been burned with some of his films, especially last year with Challengers and Queer, kind of crashing out in terms of nominations. So I'm not completely sure if Luca is in the conversation again. I want it to happen, but at best, I think Julia Roberts might get nominated for Best Actress. And then number 6, I have The Ballad of the Small Player by Edward Berger. Just like I mentioned before with Chloe Zhao, with returning, Oscar winners or Oscar nominees. Edward Berger, he's hot off of Conclave. He's done All Quiet on the Western Front. He's a good, Oscar returnee. Major problem that I personally have with, putting The Ballad of a Small Player is it's Netflix's only big contender right now. And on top of that, Edward Berger, he's more of a middle ground director in terms of, playing with older generational voters, but also at the same time, he hasn't really played a lot with younger generation, although Conclave turned into a fucking meme last year, which is really, really cool. But you kind of have to put a little side eye on Edward Berger's new film. But who knows, maybe it could survive at the end of the day. And then at number 7, this is my international pick right now. And I have to say this because usually international picks start to pick up after Cannes premieres happened. And, you kind of get a little small sense of what could actually, become international picks for the international feature list, but also for Best Picture. But the reason why I have this film here is because it's a returning Oscar contender, and I think this might be the year for this person. And I'm talking about Joaquin, Sentimental Value. Now, here's the thing. His last movie, The Worst Person in the World, did pretty well in terms of the award season. I think he was super close of getting that international feature win, but I think also he cooked pretty well with that film. And I think Sentimental Value, from what I've been hearing, it's also, part English, part Danish, and Norwegian, excuse me. So you have Renee Redzev coming back, excuse me for my pronunciation, regular for Joachim Trier. Then you have Stellan Skarsgård, who is overdue for an Oscar nomination, in my opinion. And then you have Ellie Fanning, who's appearing in this movie. So you have the nice package. You have, the returnee of Joachim Trier. And I think if Neon, who distributed The Worst Person in the World, distributes Sentimental Value and wins the Palme d'Or again, then yeah, you gotta put that on your list for sure. So that's why I have it at number 7. Now number 8, number 9, and number 10, these are kind of fighting for my top picks for number 8, 9, and 10. starting with Marty Supreme by one of the Safdie brothers. There's another Safdie brother who's doing another film with The Rock. But I'm personally putting Marty Supreme here because you have Timothée Chalamet as the lead character, and he's playing a ping pong character, and he's going around the world doing ping pong shit. So you gotta like put that into account. And I think the Safdie brothers are overdue for, you know, an awards nomination, especially since Uncut Gems wasn't even nominated for anything around that time. So it's good, and it's also a big gamble because A24 is putting a lot of chips on this movie. I think it's like one of the highest, you know, funded films that they have in their list this year. But negative side, A24 is really terrible with their festival and awards picks. Usually they go one or the other way another. And if Marty Supreme is like the front runner or like the first choice for, you know, the award season, they have to put all their stocks in it, because if they start picking a lot of festival picks from, you know, other places like Cannes, Venice, TIFF, New York Film Festival, if they get like a lot of those films and, you know, see which ones are doing well over there and they choose another thing, then I think Marty Supreme might be fucked. But I'm still, you know, putting Marty Supreme here. Now, number 9, number 10, this is really interesting. I'm still putting at number 9 Wicked for Good for John M. Chu, because the last Wicked movie did pretty well. And even though I think it's going to get lesser nominations in terms of like the text and maybe, you know, the acting awards, I think Wicked for Good, as for like a Best Picture nominee, it's going to be, you know, safe right now. And then number 10, I have the untitled Bruce Springsteen biopic. This one is going to be really interesting. Usually I am trying to figure out which biopic film is going to, you know, stay in the top 10. It's either this or Michael, and I will explain a little bit later why Michael is out of the top 10 in my opinion, because there's some, you know, bubbling shit that's happening with that film. But the reason why I have the Bruce Springsteen movie in this top 10 is because Jeremy Allen White is playing Bruce Springsteen, and he's been doing pretty damn well with like the Emmys, and he's very well liked in the industry, and him playing, you know, the boss is going to give him a lot of leverage this awards season that's coming next year. So, you know, you gotta like take that into account. I think the negative side is kind of like making sure that if this is going to be like the musical biopic of next year, then how well is it going to do? Is it going to, you know, traject like A Complete Unknown, where it does pretty well? It gets, you know, some technicals, maybe Best Director, and then Picture, and then Jeremy Allen White, or maybe, you know, Best Supporting Actress or Actress, or is it just going to be like Best Picture, Jeremy Allen White? That's it. That would be crazy. That would be crazy. But I don't know. We'll have to see about that. But that's like my top 10. Taking into account some of the, you know, big choices that I have listed here, and also some of the, you know, films that I've been like taking a look, you know, shortly a little bit on like Reddit and other places. But I think I'm going to go, you know, a little bit closer to some of the stuff that could be, you know, wild cards and just stuff that could potentially happen. And Scott Cooper is actually directing the Bruce Springsteen movie. He actually did a couple movies that I really liked, like Hostiles and Black Mass. And he also did Crazy Heart, which did pretty well during that award season. And if I remember correctly, Jeff Bridges won the Oscar for that film. So it would be really cool to see Scott Cooper return to the Oscar stage. But that's the reason why I did this little like crazy edit. And also at the same time, it's called Deliver Me from Nowhere. So there you go. Now here are some of my, you know, personal picks in terms of like the bottom 10. And some of them are wild cards, and others are, you know, stuff that could actually potentially happen. So cutting it off from here is Avatar: Fire and Water. I understand it's kind of weird to, you know, take out Avatar into, you know, the mix of the top 10 and like place it at number 11. But here's the thing. I think there's going to be one, you know, Avatar film that just like completely misses in terms of like Best Picture. The second film, it did pretty well with the nominations, but it got far lesser nominations compared to the first film. And if it's going to be like the same movie over and over again with like the plot and just like the way the film is like perceived around awards time, then, you know, I think the film could potentially miss for Best Picture. But I do also think that it being kind of like the second half of the, you know, second movie, it's kind of like split into two apparently. It could, you know, benefit a little bit as kind of like a closer for that section of the plot in terms of like Avatar, you know, whatever. But the point is, it has to end somewhere. And I think it makes kind of sense for Avatar 3 to kind of like miss Best Picture and like have something else, you know, contending, especially if you need something, you know, new and something that like can spice it up a little bit. But that's why I personally have Avatar 3 or Avatar Fire and Water at number 11. And then at number 12, Michael. Let's talk about this. So this is the Michael Jackson biopic, and it's Antoine Fuqua, who hasn't been really a awards contender probably since Training Day, if I remember correctly. But some of his films are very like tame and kind of like studio driven. He is a journeyman. I respect that. And, you know, he's kind of like James Mangold, who he delivers a lot of, you know, great films for the masses. But Michael is, of course, the Michael Jackson biopic. And usually this would be, you know, a nice hit on the mark in terms of getting that nomination for Best Picture. But here's the thing. I've been hearing some things about the production behind this film. It is in trouble right now. I heard like the third act of this film is completely going to be nuked because of the subject matter at hand in terms of portraying Michael Jackson as the PDF file. And the estate is pretty angry about that, and they don't want to, you know, portray Michael as that. So apparently they're going to scratch the third act and they're going to reshoot it. And it might take a little bit longer for the film to come out. Now, I do think also, if I remember correctly from reading the reports, the movie has a rough 4-hour cut, assembly cut, so they can have more time to, you know, edit the film and maybe reshoot the third act and immediately like paste the rest of the third act into the film. So that's why I personally have it like below the line in terms of, you know, the Best Picture list. And also on top of that, I think it really depends on how well it does at the box office. It seems like it's going to be a big like winner with it being a $1 billion movie. But I've been getting like weird war flashbacks from the Whitney Houston biopic, the Bob Marley biopic, mostly the Elvis biopic, but the Elvis biopic did pretty well financially. But those two, like the Bob Marley and the Whitney Houston movies, they didn't do pretty well financially. So if this movie does very bad financially and critically, it's over. It's done. It's going to go for the Razzies. But I'm not going to predict that because I think it'll, you know, get a lot of money. It'll hit $1 billion. I fear that. But at the end of the day, this could be, you know, a Bohemian Rhapsody type of deal where, you know, the production's a disaster, but it comes out pretty nicely at the end of the day. And then eventually it might get, you know, some tech nominations and maybe Best Actor for the lead. And maybe, you know, supporting actor for Coleman Domingo because he's playing the villain in the movie. He's playing Joe Jackson. He's going to beat the shit out of Michael Jackson. So you got to see it to believe it. So that's why I have Michael at number 12. And then at number 13, I have The Roses by Jay Roach. Usually his movies are kind of not really Best Picture players. Bombshell was his last like super big one. That was a political drama, but if I remember correctly, it got, I believe, Margot Robbie that nomination. And I think also, if I remember correctly, let me double check. It also got Charlize Theron for the Best Actress nomination for Bombshell. So those were 2 nominations, and then Best Makeup. Yeah, I remember this. But some of his films aren't, you know, awards worthy. So that's why I personally have him at number 13 or 12, around that range. And then I almost forgot this movie, but I want to just like put it out there, and maybe in post I will, update the list right here. But Begonia by Yorgos Lanthimos, he's coming hot off of Poor Things and his other movie that came out last year, Kinds of Kindness. And, this is going to be kind of like the same in line with The Favorite and Poor Things, as it's going to be written by somebody else and it's not written by him. And it's something that is kind of like completely out there, but could actually potentially, make a mark. It is a remake of a South Korean movie, and the plot is really fucking crazy. It's about this alien invasion, and two main characters are like in the middle of the mix. I don't want to go super deep into it, but I saw the original movie, Save the Green Planet, and it's fucking bonkers, and I don't know how Yorgos Lanthimos is going to like pull that movie together, but it's Yorgos, and he's always like good. I haven't seen a bad Yorgos film in quite a while from him. So you gotta like take that into account. And then he's bringing his players back. Most notably, Emma Stone is back. She shaved her head. So she's doing like the crazy thing that you usually do with Yorgos Lanthimos films. And then also I have Frankenstein by Guillermo del Toro. Netflix is distributing this movie. And of course, it's a retelling of Frankenstein, but it's told in a very retrospective, but also very literal and accurate depiction of Frankenstein. And it's a movie that Del Toro has always wanted to do. So you gotta like take that into account. He got the Best Picture nomination for Nightmare Alley. He won for The Shape of Water. He's back, and he's never going to, kind of like disappear every time he makes a movie. Nah. Del Toro is going to bring back his style of filmmaking, his dark gothic filmmaking. So that's why I have those films on my list. As for the rest of, the list that I can, name off of, Train Dreams that premiered at Sundance. I don't know too much about this movie, but I heard good things about it. I also heard good things about If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You by Rose Byrne. Not the director, but the actor in the movie, the actress, Rose Byrne. I heard her performance in that movie is really great, and it could potentially break into the Best Picture lineup because of its subject matter, but also since the Oscars are going pretty progressive with taking into nominations of horror films or psychological thrillers. And Conan's also in the movie, who also hosted the Oscars this year, so that would be really nice. But yeah, this is like my personal list of potential Oscar nominees that could happen, next year. Now, I want to open up the floor to Mr. ChatGPT and DeepSeek and see what they think of my picks and how it could actually play out this award season or the next award season. So let's figure out what they're saying. And like ChatGPT, DeepSeek, I'm using these modules to kind of like pull a lot of like thinking in terms of where I want to personally go with my picks for these films. And, it's just satire. It's just for shits and giggles. You don't have to like take it seriously. It's way too early to, fully predict some of the stuff that's going to happen next year because it's already March. But I think it's just really funny. And it would be really cool to kind of figure out what these AI modules are, thinking about here and there. So let's get into the ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Chinese social credits type of thing. Let's get fucking crazy, man. Now, I listed my top 10 in unsequential order or sequential order. I didn't specify the model that I'm using, which is DeepSeek. And I use the R1 DeepSeek or DeepThink thing where it would kind of think thoroughly potential scenarios. So I listed out my top 10 and then it spit out some, little prompts saying okay, so this guy is predicting the 98th Academy Awards Best Picture nominees, and I gave them a hypothetical list, blah, 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 blah. And some of these directors are well known, like Paul Thomas Anderson, Spike Lee, Safdie brothers. Others are, less established in the awards circuit, like Trey Parker, not Trey Edward Schultz, but Trey Parker, John Chu, even though that's weird because Wicked was nominated for Best Picture last year. So they're just like, okay, well, I need to analyze each film from like a pedigree, genre themes, past Oscar trends, and then, go from there. But also take into account Paul Thomas Anderson, who has been nominated before, but hasn't won Best Picture, or Chloe Zhao, who has won before, but might have, an edge because she has won. And, Spike Lee, which often tackles social issues, which the Academy loves. That's a good, pointer. Thank you, Mr. DeepSeek. I don't know if it's a Mr. or Mrs. I don't like to gender people. And then also taking into account some of the genres like historical dramas, social issue films, emotionally resonant stories usually perform pretty well. They said, like, for example, Hamlet, which is a literally adaptation of Shakespeare's Family, could be a strong contender, and High and Low can be a contender because of it being remade as a film from Spike Lee, and it's a Kurosawa film. And then also some of the films that already have buzz, and also, taking into account what if, Paul Thomas Anderson's film is a front runner, or what if Chloe Zhao's film is a front runner right now, or what if Spike Lee's film is a front runner right now. And then also, thinking about the dark horses like Joaquin Treyer's Sentimental Value as like the dark horse, or maybe the Springsteen biopic being a dark horse, or maybe a miss or a hit. And then just, picking out alternatives, which I actually, listed later deeply after it listed out the top 10 in sequential order from, DeepSeek. But DeepSeek's list of frontrunners, starting from like the top 4, is Hamnet, One Battle After Another, High and Low, and then The Ballad of a Small Player. And then it would kind of like give you like the odds with stars. And then the reason why. So starting with Hamnet, DeepSeek says that Zhao has already won an Oscar for Nomadland, and Hamnet is a novel based on Shakespeare's Family, and it combines literary prestige, emotional depth, and historical drama. And that's usually the trifecta for Academy love. So that's why it would often resonate for Academy voters, and the odds are pretty high. One Battle After Another has a 4 out of 5 chance of, being the Oscar contender it can be. The reason why is because PTA is an Oscar favorite. They like character-driven epics, and it could mirror, There Will Be Blood in terms of level of acclaim. I highly doubt that, but I want to see that actually happen. And then the title suggests its grand thematic ambition, which is pretty cool. I don't know. Not too sure about whether or not that could actually like work out, because I think Warner Brothers is trying to like bury this film, but we'll see. And then number 3, DeepSeek has High and Low, which is the reason why is because Spike Lee is remaking a Kurosawa classic thriller. It has themes of class and morality, which usually align with Lee's social charged filmography like BlacKkKlansman. And it could also be an update on modern inequality, excuse me. So it could be a zeitgeist pick, and it has a 4 out of 5 chance of being nominated. And then number 4, DeepSeek is saying The Ballad of a Small Player, excuse me for my tripping up. And the reason why they are predicting it is because Berger's All Quiet on the Western Front dominated 2023's Oscars. They didn't mention Conclave also as well. This adaptation gambling thriller set in Maku could blend existential drama and suspense, and could be a dark horse for the season. And it has a 3 out of 5 odds. So that's actually pretty cool. I think it's pretty pragmatic and makes perfect sense to have like these top 4 films contending for the Oscars. I don't have any, objections with DeepSeek right now, but I will explain a little bit later of some of the stuff that I tried to do with the prompt, but seems pretty right. Sorry, I gotta like pull on my Chinese mode for this prompt, because I think the last top 10 is really, really interesting. So number 5, After the Hunt, DeepSeek says the reason why it's at number 5 is because Guadagnino's essential psychological drama appealed to actors' branches. This is a tense awards Beatty thriller starring Julia Roberts that has like a question mark there, which is kind of weird. It could be following, promising young woman's path. I think that's really interesting. I also think it could like potentially mirror Tar with its subject matter, but also at the same time, I said this before, Luca, he's like on the radar right now, but the problem is the last two films blanked, morbed last year, so who knows? DeepSeek is thinking something for real. Sentimental value, the reason why it's at number 6 is because Trier's The Worst Person in the World was a critical darling. It could have a passionate campaign. It could potentially win over screenplay and acting branches. I can see that. I can definitely see that. I can see that playing out. I could see more Best Director, which would be really cool. And also Best Actress. And then number 7, Bruce Springsteen biopic. Biopics are usually good to often not overperform. Springsteen's working class ethos and legacy could elevate this beyond formula, and the director matters. If it's someone like Scorsese, odds skyrocket. I didn't, specify the director here, but I think it's really interesting. I should have just said Scott Cooper. Whoa, costume change. I'm recording this a day later, but let's continue on with the last 3 entries in the DeepSeek findings of the Oscar predictions for Best Picture. So number 8, DeepSeek says that Marty Supreme is a wild card, and the reason why is because the Safdies excel at frenetic, anxiety-inducing cinema. If this is a gritty character study, it might be too polarizing for Academy tastes, and yeah, I agree. I think the Safdies, like their style of filmmaking, really depends on how well it can do well with other, audiences, general audiences. I don't know if it will work for some voters, but if Marty Supreme is completely different from, Uncut Gems and Good Time, then yeah, I can definitely see Marty Supreme break out into the forefront. And the Whitney Springs, Trey Parker's movie. The reason why DeepSeek has it at number 9 is because South Park's sensibilities may not translate to the Oscar success unless this is a very sharp satire, just like Don't Look Up, which, yeah, I agree with that also as well. Although I do think South Park has overcome its welcome in the media landscape, and I do think the boys definitely need a W in terms of getting a film out in the forefront for, the Oscars, but I can definitely see that. And then also at number 10, Wicked for Good. The first Wicked movie was a box office smash, but like with musicals, they sometimes often struggled to win Best Picture, like La La Land and West Side Story. La La Land was pretty close. It was pretty close. And West Side Story was kind of like far out, but it would have been nice, to have West Side Story win Best Picture that year, in my opinion. But yeah, I think DeepSeek is pretty on the nose with that. But they actually predicted Hamnet to win Best Picture over one battle after another in High and Low. Even though it does say at the end it could upset and dominate critics' awards or tackle urgent social themes. And the key factors to shift a race, as always, is the festival launchpad. Venice, Telluride, TIFF are very critical. Actor campaigns are really good, like a transformative lead performance could also sway voters. And the feel of the year is also a good factor into predicting Best Picture winners. Societal moods like escapism, social commentary will also benefit and help shape the preferences of any film that is listed here. But let's actually deep dive into some of the other choices that I plugged into the DeepSeek hole and see if any of the choices have changed after I plugged in a couple movies. So I actually plugged in a couple more movies to see if any things have changed with the prompt. I added The Roses by Jay Roach, Michael by Antoine Fuqua, Begonia by Yorgos Lanthimos, Avatar Fire and Water by James Cameron, and Frankenstein by Guillermo del Toro. And what it spit out was basically the same thing. They had Hamnet at number 1. DeepSeek said Hamnet is a really solid choice to win Best Picture. I'm not completely sure, but we'll see about that. Frankenstein at number 2. One Battle After Another at number 3, High and Low at number 4, Begonia at number 5, The Ballad of a Small Player at number 6, which is basically the Edward Berger movie. Number 7, these are like the wild cards that, DeepSeek predicted. Avatar: Fire and Water, Michael, After the Hunt, The Roses at number 10. And then the long shots have pushed out Marty Supreme, Whitney Springs, Wicked for Good, and the Springsteen biopic. And the reason why those are the 4 long shots is, 1, Marty Supreme, DeepSeek says that it's too gritty, anxious for the Academy. I disagree. I don't know if it's going to go that way. I think it's going to be like a comedic movie. Whitney Springs, comedy rarely wins. Sort of true, although Everything Everywhere All at Once was a comedy in some parts. Wicked for Good, a musical struggle outside of tech categories. That sometimes is, the heat of the moment, especially last year with Wicked. It did win, some of the text and some of the designs for that movie, but not anything else with like the acting and like the picture stuff. And then the Springsteen biopic, it depends on the director. It's Scott Cooper, so it could be like a hit and miss. I agree with that. But for some reason, after I plugged everything in, DeepSeek said Frankenstein, which is the Del Toro movie, which is pretty strange. I don't know how that would work, but I think the reason why it says Frankenstein could actually win Best Picture next year is because it has everything the Academy adores: a beloved auteur reimagining a literary classic with visual grandeur, thematic heft, otherness, societal rejection. And if it balances spectacle with the pathos, like The Shape of Water, it could edge out Hamnet. That's pretty interesting. I would kind of combat that because Nightmare Alley kind of did the same thing, but it only got a Best Picture nomination, if I remember correctly. So who knows? Maybe it could be like The Shape of Water, where it just overcomes everything that people have perceived, the genre of sci-fi and a mixture of creature feature. And of course, The Shape of Water won Best Picture that year. But the dark horse Begonia could also be a shocker, according to DeepSeek, because Lanthimos is overdue for a Best Picture win, and if Begonia is an inventive and crowd-pleasing film, just like The Favorite, it could really rally the highbrow vote. And I actually kind of agree with this, because usually the highbrow voters, or middle highbrow voters, really like something that really feeds their senses a little bit with their brains, but can also be very palatable for general audiences. Some general audiences can still enjoy the movie. The Favorite, Poor Things did that in mind, compared to his other films like Kinds of Kindness or The Sacred of the Deer, or The Killing of a Sacred Deer. My bad. And then finally, High and Low as the sleeper hit, because Spike Lee is overdue for a second Best Picture win. Weird. That's kind of funny because Spike Lee did not win Best Picture for BlacKkKlansman or Do the Right Thing, but weirdly enough, DeepSeek thinks that. I don't know why. Modern reworking of Kurosawa's Tale of a Class Conflict could also feel urgent in 2025's political climate. That makes sense. That totally makes sense. But when I plugged everything in and added the films that I've been kind of looking across the radar, the key takeaways this prompt brought me to is genre bias. They still favor, prestige films like biopics, literary adaptations over blockbusters and comedies. That's makes sense. Totally makes sense. Auteurs always rule. Del Toro, Zhao, and Lanthimos have recent Oscar clout. That's true. And the wild card factor being, Springsteen biopic and the Michael biopic could also upend the race with transformative performances, and I agree with that. It's going to be a battle between Springsteen and Michael Jackson, and of course Michael Jackson will win because he's the bigger person and the bigger star, but it really depends on the movie, if one of those movies are actually really good and actually carry over to the Oscars. But yeah, I think this prompt, adding a lot more stuff or more films into the prompt and kind of seeing how the scenario would play out if I added more films, also benefited me a little bit more personally. I think, adding more of the typical Oscar fare, The Roses, Michael, Avatar, Fire and Water, even though it could, have a chance to blip or blank or morb next year. depending on how well the movie is perceived. But I think adding those films and then kind of like playing around with the prompt a little bit more also helped me like more learning about how AI works when it comes to predicting something that's attentive a little bit later into, you know, the year. AI can't really predict the future, but can it really predict scenarios and like mathematics and stuff that is very inside baseball based. And I think it got most of the stuff right on the nose. So that's just like part of the reason why I wanted to make this video, is because my curiosity came over me and I wanted to see what, you know, the tech is saying. But yeah, this is basically it. I hope you guys enjoy this really crazy video. Don't take this as like my tentative predictions for next year's Best Picture race. This is kind of like a more like funsy thing. I'm personally going to wait till like the Cannes, you know, film festival is over, and once the summer starts, I can probably like predict better with the choices that I have. But for now, this is my kind of premature predictions for next year's Best Picture race. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. Check out my other videos. There's going to be more film reviews, you know, anytime around when I have the chance. I hope you guys stick around for the channel. But yeah, peace out, guys.